This is The Final Word with Adam Collins and Geoff Lemon, and we move to an interview that we've been hoping to do for a number of years. Someone who has truly done it all in sports broadcasting in the UK and around the world. These days, the leading cricket voice for 5 Live, more Olympic Games than hot dinners, and one of the most well-loved voices in cricket as well on the BBC. Elly Oldroyd, welcome at long last to The Final Word.
Well, I feel like I've been waiting years for the invite, to be honest, Adam, because you know that, hi Geoff as well, I, as you both know, I'm a huge listener to the Final Word, and you kind of accompanied me on some very long journeys recently, so I just feel like I've, been in your very lovely company on many occasions in the last couple of years, and you've actually, say this, let's get the soppy stuff out of the way right up, you've actually cheered me up in some dark times in the last year as well. So thank you both for that, and thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you, Elly. I feel like, as I say, we've wanted to do this for a while, and the way that you've relayed to Geoff and I, taking us on these journeys, having your 2 daughters at university, of course, through COVID, it's been a lot of driving around to make sure that you get to spend some time with them. And it's kind of nice that we've been, a lot of the time, riding shotgun with you in the passenger seat.
Well, I mean, some podcasts just don't cut the mustard timing-wise, so you have to keep changing from one to the other. But, a nice 1 hour, 47 minutes, and I think, yep, that's great. That'll get me to the next service station with no problem whatsoever, and I've got time to fit in a story time too.
You were the first woman to be involved in Test Match Special in that summer of 2000, and I want to get to all of that, and we will, and there's a lot of sort of serious issues that we'll take on in this interview as well. But to start, it's been a crazy couple of weeks for you. When Prince Philip died, my instinct was to text you immediately because I knew you had a pretty big week and a half ahead of you as the solo broadcaster permitted to enter the cathedral to essentially give ball-by-ball commentary on the royal funeral in much the same way that you did the same at the royal wedding back in 2018. Try and somehow explain to us how it turns out that with your sports background, you end up in the cathedral doing your thing with, well, I suppose you're person 31, 30 people permitted in the funeral, and you're the other person in that ceremony.
Yeah, I think it feels to some people like quite a weird thing to imagine that somebody who is essentially a sports broadcaster has this key role at the heart of a major royal occasion. But actually, it's something that happened decades ago. I mean, you think back to Brian Johnston.
Yep.
I mean, he commentated on royal events.
Yep.
Because I suppose you take sports broadcasters and they can react to things around in the way that news journalists perhaps can't, because you've got to be able to paint a picture. You've got to be able to describe a scene, and you've got to be able to convey a feeling as well. So when it comes to a major live broadcast event, actually sports people do this all the time. They're doing it every week. So in fact, our producer in the studio was one of our top sports producers, Graham, who is used to directing things like the Ryder Cup and major football afternoons on Radio 5 Live on our sports network. So he is used to being able to go from one thing to another seamlessly and not panic about things that might happen out of the ordinary. And actually, when it comes to being in the chapel, things will pretty much, you hope, run as you imagine they're going to. So you get the order of service beforehand, and there are very precise timing points in a funeral service, as anybody who's been to a funeral knows. And you've got hymns, might have an anthem, you've got prayers, you've got readings. And so the time that you have to speak in between those points is very precise. But at the same time, you might get an unexpected gap. So at the start, we knew that the procession from the west steps of St George's Chapel to the point where the choir was going to start singing was going to be 1 minute and 48 seconds. So you can pretty much plan what you're going to say in that time. And you time it, and we actually rehearsed it a couple of times, and you ran through. So you have a script. So basically, unlike any other form of sports commentary, you have a script more or less, but you've still got to be able to feel it as well, and you've got to be able to get the tone right to feel it, and you have to be able to describe things. So if, for example, it had taken longer than they planned to move the coffin to the position in front of the high altar, I had in my head things that I could describe in the chapel. So the dark wood Gothic choir stalls, the garter banners hanging above the chapel itself, the light shining through the stained glass windows, you have to be able to have in your mind those things that you might have to say if your script doesn't fill in time.
And so is the idea, Elly, that a news reporter is more focused on facts and they're only supposed to be bringing information, and a sports broadcaster has to be able to put across some of the emotion of a moment as well, or the significance on a human level rather than just a factual level?
Yeah, I think, and facts are a very important part of it, and we get very large briefing packs beforehand. So, and I think back to the funeral of Princess Diana, which was the first major royal occasion that I did. And on that day, I don't think I've ever been so nervous in my life, before or since. It was really, it was an extraordinary moment. It was an extraordinary moment of emotion, but also just that feeling that you've got to get it right. You know that there are people listening across the country, across the world. So for this latest royal funeral, we were broadcasting on Radio 5 Live, on Radio 4, so the big speech network, on World Service, across local radio, the EBU, the European Broadcasting Union, were taking a feed of it. So I knew beforehand that an awful lot of people are going to be listening to it. And you cannot mess up, because the eyes of the world are on the BBC at that point as well. So on the day of Princess Diana's funeral, I had facts in my head and I had flashcards, I had things written down, so I knew that I could describe the route that the coffin was going to take. So I was on the processional route that day. So it was the point where the coffin and the procession came out to Kensington Palace, and there's a private road which goes down from Kensington Palace, and then it joins Kensington Gore through the centre of London and past the Royal Albert Hall. And the streets were packed with people. So I was in the crowd. So I knew what I was going to say. I had in my mind the words I was going to say. But at the point that the coffin came into the view of people for the first time, there was this gasp of emotion. There was this audible feeling of, oh my God, this is real. The first sight of the coffin, do you remember the wreath of white flowers on the top, the card saying mummy from her sons, the princes walking behind. And somewhere in the crowd, a woman just kind of wailed. And it was one of the most haunting things I think I've ever heard. So you can't just stick to what you think you're going to say at that point. You've got to be able to say, the emotion is starting to really get to people. But it's like being at any sporting event. So it's like what we all do in our day jobs. You want to be able to convey the feeling of the crowd. If somebody had said to you, how will it feel on the day of the World Cup final at Lord's, ahead of that Super Over, none of us knew what that was going to feel like. So you've got to be able to be in possession of the facts. You've got to be able to breathe, control your nerves, control the sense that this is a pretty big deal. And at the same time convey a picture and a scene at that moment. Yeah,
so there is that comparison to a major sporting moment, and not to sort of conflate death with sport or anything like that, but in the case of nailing a big moment like a World Cup final or a test match with a close conclusion or something like that. So in some respects you've been preparing for this moment for an entire career.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's 30 years since I started working in live national sports broadcasting. And I remember actually the day of the royal wedding thinking, actually, this is... Because it was a big deal. I mean, it was a huge deal at the time for me to be able to be the first, the only person inside St George's Chapel for the royal wedding and then for the royal funeral, but also the first woman to have that role inside the chapel, or sort of to be part of the service, to be the voice of the service, and because it's the solemnity of it is the big thing as well. Because on a procession, it's the it's the pageantry, it's the colour, and then in the chapel, it's the service itself.
Elly, how do you get the gig as the royal correspondent? I mean, it doesn't seem to be a natural flow on from doing sports commentary to being on call for all of those big events. How did it happen in the first place?
Well, I think it's a very good question. I've no idea. You kind of need to ask the management, really. But I suppose, you think that the Princess Diana's funeral was 1997. So at that stage, I was relatively young and relatively new to national broadcasting. But I think they wanted to convey at that point the feeling that she was a young woman. So the voices around the funeral were going to be people who were similar sort of age at that point, and mixture of male and female voices. So the traditional, the Richard Dimbleby way of doing it over the years, which was all male, and I'm not sure about this, but I'm guessing that actually that first royal funeral had the best mix that we'd ever had of male and female voices, and obviously I didn't make a complete mess of it on that occasion. So I then got asked back. So the next one I think was the funeral of the Queen Mother in 2002, and then followed by a little bit of a spate of royal weddings. So Charles and Camilla, Catherine and William, and then Meghan and Harry. So actually, and once you've done it once, it's about experience. It's about experience. It's about knowing that you can do it on that moment. And I think that feeling that actually I have done it long enough now that I know what's going to happen. And I mean, I suppose at the time I was doing sport, but I was doing news as well. So I kind of had that crossover between. And actually, in fact, I had been broadcasting on the day that she died, because it was a Sunday, and I was due to do a sports programme that afternoon. That was my kind of gig at the time, was Sunday afternoon 5 Live Sport. And in the end, we didn't do a sports programme. We did a news programme. And so I ended up on the, because all the BBC networks came together, so part of that rolling news programme on that Sunday afternoon, and that was when the plane brought her back from Paris, and I just remember describing the scene as the plane landed, at the airfield, and again that sense of nobody can quite compute here what's happened. So I was maybe I'd passed the audition at that point.
So that's the here and now, Elly. But as you know, with these final word interviews, we like to go back to the very, very start of our subject's life in cricket. And yours goes all the way back to being a teenager at school, carrying around Wisdens and developing scrapbooks with what you cut out of the newspaper and all the rest of it. And I mean, I know we reflected on your professional background as to why you were in the church a couple of weeks ago, but also there's this strong presence from your father which informs I suppose your understanding of the religious side of things, but also your deep love of cricket from the outset.
Yeah, actually, I suppose you could link that back to the royal funeral and knowing what it's like, what a church service looks like and sounds like and feels like, and yeah, that was being dragged to church. And I say dragged to church because we did not go particularly willingly, my brothers and I, when we were small. But yeah, my dad was a vicar in sort of the Welsh borders, really. So Shropshire, Herefordshire, beautiful counties. With no first class cricket, so we used to go to Worcestershire quite a bit, but also my grandparents lived in Kent, and so we actually used to go to Canterbury quite a bit, and Tunbridge Wells and Maidstone and all the outgrounds at the time when we used to go and stay with my grandparents down in Margate and on the coast. But my dad was a massive cricket fan, and my mum was a big cricket fan as well. And she actually, as a schoolgirl, went to see Compton and Edridge playing at Lord's after the war.
Oh, so what a time!
I know exactly. Kind of from 1946 onwards, when the war finished, and she came back to London from being evacuated down to Wiltshire. So she was as much of a cricket fan as my dad was. But he was. You hear a lot about. There are various cliches about what vicars are like, and some of them love trains, and some of them love cricket. And my dad loved trains and cricket. I was quite interested in God as well, but the cricket was a huge deal.
Must have loved cricket training.
I know. Yeah, well, he used to try and skive off Evensong if there was a John Player League game going on a Sunday afternoon, or he would not necessarily skive off, but he would find his curate or one of his backup junior ministers to take Evensong, so he wasn't missing the thrilling conclusion of a game at Taunton. But we grew up in a house that watched sport all the time, so it was football on a Saturday afternoon, or Grandstand, which was our the BBC version of Grandstand, which was live, whatever the sport was on a Saturday afternoon, and Match of the Day on a Saturday night, and the cricket was something that I just didn't get. I just had no clue about it, and I got quite well into my teens, rebelling against cricket and saying, "That's the most boring game in the world. Why are we spending hours watching this?" And then thinking, it's just ridiculous to try and fight against this because I'm never going to get rid of it. My brothers are into it as well, and I wasn't sporty at school at all. I was hopeless at sport at school, pretty much. But I mean, they didn't do a great deal to inspire people who weren't really into sport and couldn't play it. There was no sort of, oh, well, let's see if she can do a little bit of, dance or badminton or something that doesn't involve getting wet or running up and down a muddy hockey pitch. And so I refused to play sport at school pretty much. But then when my dad started talking to me about cricket and describing it, and he sat so patiently with me, and when I said, what's an over? He would say, right, well, an over is 6 balls. And I said, well, why are there 2 bowlers and why are there 2 batsmen? Why are there 2 sets of stumps? And so he would run through all of that. And he explained it to me incredibly patiently. And I don't know if either of you had a teenage obsession, because I went from having no interest in cricket whatsoever to being unbelievably obsessed with it, age kind of 14,
evangelical
15.
Type.
Hugely evangelical. And the Wisdens. I mean, I had completely forgotten this till I went to a school reunion a few years ago. And this woman who I'd been at school with said, yeah, I remember you walking around the playing fields at school carrying this big thick yellow book. And I thought, oh my God, I must have been so boring, such a nerd. And I did make scrapbooks. I cut out cuttings, so overseas series particularly. I don't know what's happened to the scrapbooks, but the players of the time. So I loved Derek Randall. When you guys talk about the centenary test, that brings back so many memories for me, because I stayed up all night and listened to that and loved the stories around that. So Derek Randall, then David Gower, Ian Botham. One of my big heroes was Bob Woolmer, and I'm not really sure why exactly, because you think Randall was this kind of mercurial batsman, brilliant fielder, impish personality. Gower with his languid stroke play, Botham just smashing it all over the place. But what I mean, maybe you two can explain this to me. Why I secretly had this thing about Bob Woolmer. I don't know what it says about me as a personality, deep down.
Maybe it's something we should interrogate on Storytime at some stage, go to the bottom of why people are drawn to certain players. And then I suppose there's the summer of 1976, which is perhaps one of the most well-loved summers for a number of reasons, not least Viv Richards, but that sort of formative stage of your teenage life, and your dad's picked up on this passion of yours, and suddenly you're consuming a lot of it, and you're going along for the first time as well to Test matches.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, exactly. What a year to fall in love with cricket, because I mentioned the English heroes, but Viv Richards and Michael Holding and Andy Roberts and Clive Lloyd, and I still get a thrill when I'm sitting having breakfast at the Aegeus Bowl like we did last summer with Mikey.
Yes.
Who was one of the reasons that I fell in love with cricket. But yeah, the following summer, my dad got tickets to go and see the Australians at Lord's, and took me along, and got tickets for 2 successive days actually. So Thursday he took my brother, Friday he took me, and so he wanted to get me a day off school. Wrote to my headmistress, and said, Eleanor has expressed the desire to be the first woman cricket correspondent of the Times, which was a total fabrication. I think he just completely, he knew that I loved cricket, but I think he thought, well, how can I sell this to the headmistress of quite an academic, quite a stuffy girls' school? But I mean, credit to her, because she obviously looked at that and thought, well, of course, yes, that is something that a girl should definitely aspire to doing, whatever she wants to do. And if it's writing about cricket in a leading newspaper, then of course she should aspire to doing that. So anyway, so she gave me the day off school. We went along. I think we saw about 40 minutes play in the whole day, and it poured down with rain pretty much all day long. But I just have this memory of walking around the ground, sort of underneath the old grandstand at Lord's. That kind of dark area that you walk around that side of the ground. So from the pavilion, if you're walking around to the media centre, but then it was all wooden, and it was low, and it was dark, and it was pouring with rain. But seeing some of the Aussie players coming round the other way, and I couldn't tell you who they were now, but I in my mind it was Max Walker, and it was Dennis Lilly, and it was Rick McCosker, and it was just that gasp, and the baggy green caps, and the huge green V on the jumper as well. So and it just made this huge impression on me, and I think at that point I thought, If I can find somebody who will pay me to watch cricket all day, then that is a way to spend a life.
I often wonder this with a lot of the people we speak to, and I think about it with my own experience as well. Have you ever been able to define in any way what it was about cricket that got to you? Because it gets people, it sort of creeps in, and the little tendrils creep in and they wrap around you, and the next thing you know, you're all bound up tight. But is there anything that stands out about, something about the game or the way it was played or whatever it was that made you be so drawn to it over that period of time?
Well, I suppose that there was a romantic image of it, if you like, in those days. It was the green of the grass, the green of the Aussie caps, the white of the players playing, the aesthetic beauty of a perfect cover drive or a fluid bowling action, and I'm thinking about Mikey again here. But I think it's also the intellectual curiosity of it as well. And I think, having not known anything about it, you then discover this vast world of facts and knowledge, and I have that feeling now, as I say, after all of these years, there is so much to learn about and so much to know and so many stories to read, and the history of it as well. And so I was quite a passionate reader of cricket history at that stage as well, and reading Neville Cardus and John Arlott and books about the great players of the past. And so when I listen to story time, I love linking back into that and learning new things as well about the game. And actually, one of the great pleasures for me over the years. So we'll talk about this in a minute. But my cricket career has been kind of quite lumpy. It's sort of gone up and down over the years, and now I'm back into it and doing it pretty much. It's the thing I do most of the time now. But I feel like I'm learning about the way the game has developed as well. So actually in the 90s and the thousands, I was watching as a fan largely, and then you get back into how the game has changed and developed in the last 10 years or so, and I love that learning all the time and learning from other people and I've learned a lot, as I say, from listening to you guys as well, and that's one of the things that I love about the podcast. This is not just a complete fangirl about the final word, by the way, but it is one of the things that I appreciate and keeps me going on long car journeys.
No, and we appreciate it. It means an awful lot to us that you're, as I say, with us each week, especially on the weekend show, that it makes that impression. As did David Gower. David Gower's debut perhaps gets talked about more than any other modern player, I think. Even though he didn't make 100, 70 odd, didn't he, on debut? But
that's right.
It was the fact that first ball goes for 4. It was the way that he played. And there you are, sitting at Edgbaston that afternoon.
Yeah, what a princely entry. It was the Arlott commentary, wasn't it? Because it was my birthday. It was my birthday treat to go to Edgbaston.
Fantastic.
Because that was our closest test ground where we lived at the time. And I'd forgotten some of this, but I actually wrote a diary through my teenage years, which
of course you did,
which is hidden somewhere in the house and never to be discovered. But yeah, so I wrote about going to Edgbaston that day, and of course, and whatever the overnight score was, I can't remember now. But anyway, but when he comes out to bat, with the blonde curls. Geoff, you asked me why I fell in love with cricket. There is a reason. There is something that's not very intellectual. It's something quite base about this. But he was a beautiful sight to behold. And then Liaquat Ali, playing for Pakistan, comes on, bowls his first ball in Test cricket, and he just lifts the bat and he pulls it to the boundary for 4 runs, and you just think, wow, what a way to make his debut on that day. And and then he was a player actually he was the first player I interviewed when I went to university, and and I kind of had the pleasure of getting to know him a bit over the years as well. But and he's he's everything you imagine he is. He sums up. He's lived being David Gower every day of his playing and non-playing career, I would say.
And is there also an aspect that, with your mum and your dad both being cricket enthusiasts, is it something that links you back to them and helps you sort of keep hold of those memories of a younger life?
Yeah, I think it was a very pleasurable thing actually all the way through. When I got more involved in cricket, my dad was the sort of person who would never say, "I'm so proud of what you've done. It's incredible." But of course he was. He showed it a lot. And one of the great fun things that I did a few times because he was a member of MCC. I joined in 1980. Was when we could go to Lord's together, and spend time. And then when I started working for TMS, to be able to take him into the TMS commentary box, and he used to love that so much because he was a terrible name dropper, my dad. So he would come and say, well, we saw Ian Botham, didn't we? And we saw Viv Richards, and how marvellous was that? And my mum as well, because I will phone her up even now. I mean, she's just had her 90th birthday, and she's always kept her Sky subscription, so she watches the cricket, and she'll get up early and watch it. And it's a lovely thing to have in common, and to feel grateful to them for having that passion. But I mean, my brothers as well, who used to play in the garden, and occasionally I wouldn't attempt to join in because I was very, very well aware of my own shortcomings on that front.
I think we had you out playing in the bubble last year, didn't we?
Yeah, we did actually.
Afternoons.
That was probably the first time I picked up a cricket bat in however many years. But yeah, a bit of concourse cricket.
Well worth it.
Eye on the ball.
Yeah, it's good times. So you're studying modern languages at Cambridge, but the flame is still burning, isn't it, for sport? And it doesn't take long after you finish at Cambridge to realise that a career in journalism is the one for you, and you decide to take an unglamorous job initially, like interning essentially, which gets you straight into a cricket press box.
Yeah, well, I was very fortunate at Cambridge to work for the student newspaper, and so I'd spent pretty much my whole time, when I wasn't pretending to work and having fun with my mates, at Fenners watching the county, because the counties would go to play Cambridge University.
Of course, yeah.
So as I say, David Gower was the first person I interviewed when he was captain of. He was playing for Leicestershire just before he became England captain. And then graduated and looked for jobs and couldn't find anything that, in newspapers. So having had newspapers, sports cricket correspondent of the Times, that didn't happen because, they said we need you to go and do a postgrad course, and I thought, no, I've had enough of studying. Now I just want to get on with it. So I went to my local radio station, and the news editor of that local radio station, David Holdsworth, I said to him, I want to cover cricket. And he said, okay, sounds good. You can go to New Road. You can take a phone with you, take a tape recorder with you, and see what you can do. Give us reports every hour, bring us back an interview at the end of the day, and just get on with it. And so this was the mid-'80s, and there were no women really doing sports journalism or broadcasting in those days at all. So he had a great... Well, I don't know, open-mindedness, but he just thought, no, if she wants to do it, let's give her the chance to do it. So I'm incredibly grateful to him for that, because I think there were probably plenty of women around in those days who didn't have those opportunities. So that was that was amazing to suddenly be at New Road in Worcester covering county cricket, and Benson and Hedges trophy games, and it was just amazing. I mean, it was kind of daunting. But I think I had enough sense that I knew what I was talking about, and that I had a right to be there for it not to scare me off.
Did it terrify the blokes who were in there? Were they sort of about to drop dead on the floor because a lady had come in here with know that their uteruses explode when they go into cricket grounds. You can be hit by the shrapnel and suddenly everybody is pregnant. I think that's how it works. It must have been very frightening for them.
Yeah, I think it probably was. Yes, there's this very small 25-year-old blonde woman, 23-year-old actually, I was even younger than that, sitting there in an open press box. So I think it's probably still the case now at county grounds. BBC local radio stations have their own sort of hermetically sealed commentary boxes, and any other. But I mean, actually, things have changed. And this is an indication of how things have changed in media in this country. That you used to get commercial local radio stations who would have a news budget and would send people to do sport, and that just doesn't happen now. They're all kind of part of one huge conglomerate, or a number of huge conglomerates. So I didn't have a commentary box to seal me from the rest of the press box. So, so for example, Worcestershire against Nottinghamshire, and all the guys would be sitting there, bent over their typewriters with their phones plugged in. And I would go along and plug my phone in, and they would give me this look of, oh my goodness me, there appears to be a lady in the commentary box. And then I would have to sit there and do my report, on the hour, every hour, and the whole place would just completely fall silent.
Like a live audience inside.
Like a live audience, but made up of 50-year-old blokes.
Probably hoping that you'd stumble. Well, maybe not hoping, but
just thinking,
perverse sort of interest as to whether you'd stuff it up.
Yeah, thinking this is, as you say, the possession of breasts and knowledge about cricket are completely mutually exclusive.
How has she got into the commentary box? She must have come in when the window was open and she can't find her way out. Help her out, somebody. Get a broom. Just help her out.
You appear to have lost your way, my dear. I think you should be in the ladies' pavilion at Worcester making teas.
I love the fact that, Elly, in your house, where we're sitting at the moment, your house is covered in cricket memorabilia. It's fantastic, all the books and Wisdens. And we're stacking, Geoff, you can't see it from your angle, but our cameras are stacked on a few Wisdens, as often it is the case at my house. And I brought down some Playfairs as well, and there's the Playfair Cricket Annual from 1985, which you've got here, which might actually be the first season you're at Worcester.
That was, I think, the first season at Worcester. So it's got Paul Downton on the front, keeping wicket in a white fluffy hat. And actually, I was thinking, if the guys say to me, so who do you remember seeing in those early seasons at Worcestershire? And I'd be thinking, was it Glenn Turner? Final word favourite, Glenn Turner. But I can tell you with some confidence that we had people like, Tim Curtis was opening batsman. What did he go in, number 3? Graham Hick.
Oh, of course, early days.
In those days as well.
Yeah.
Made his debut for Worcester in 1984, which was the year I graduated. We had people like John Inchmore. I don't know if you remember him. He was a Worcestershire favourite, so remember him. He was a big fast bowler with a impressive moustache. Phil Neal, who's the England team manager now, who I still say hello to when we're covering England games, and that kind of fondness that we were both relatively young. How old is he? Yeah, he's considerably older than me. Phew.
I like the idea of the muscle memory too, by the way. You picked up that book, Geoff. Elly's got the book in her hand and immediately knew where to thumb to without even a second guess. In that,
I know, it's an instinctive thing. But I did used to buy a Playfair every year for years, actually, just because it's an incredibly useful little... In the days before the internet, we needed to have things printed on paper and look them up. So, but I mean, going back to that first few outings at Worcester, and I do remember after probably the second day I was there, so every hour, press box falls silent, I do my report, put the phone down, get my head down again, think, shit, I hope I didn't cock up here. And the guy sitting next to me turned to me and said, "You do know what you're talking about, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I do, actually." So, with this air of complete surprise.
Do you know how to spell condescension? I imagine you do. You're very intelligent. I love this idea of people just walking around. You're all carrying a phone with you. Like, I'm assuming a sort of rotary handset that you just carry around with you everywhere and plug it into a phone jack.
If you think about sort of Bakelite ones with the things that you dial the numbers. No, I think it actually had buttons on it. But you plugged it. But yeah, at press boxes, for cricket, for football, for all sorts of sports, until very recently, you would hire a phone socket from the club or from the ground, and you'd have a portable handset, and you just go and plug it into the phone socket. And that's what I did in those days. But I couldn't drive, so I used to cycle down there as well. So I used to put my my tape recorder. It was a thing called a Ewer, which is a reel-to-reel tape recorder. And I know, and it was incredibly heavy. So for a long time, I walked with a stoop on one side because the weight of this thing used to weigh me down everywhere. But yeah, you'd go and you record your interview on that, and then you'd take it back and you'd take the reel-to-reel tapes off and you'd stick them on a tape recorder, and then you'd edit it with razor blades and China cloth pencils and little bits of sticky tape. So
fantastic.
I know.
Different world.
Very different world. Very different world.
And I expect the newsroom was as well. So you go on a relatively familiar path from one local radio station to another, and suddenly you're sort of doing big time news and working on Newsbeat in the late 80s and early 90s. So you get that sort of hard-edged journalistic training in addition to having, I suppose, fulfilled in the first instance that interest to cover sport.
Yeah, I suppose you could say I fulfilled my lifelong ambition less than 10 years after I formulated it, which is not bad going, really. So it was all going to be downhill from there. But yeah, I did Worcester for a couple of years, and then I went and worked in BBC Local Radio. So my first job in BBC Local Radio was at Radio Shropshire, which was Minor Counties. So I had a blissful couple of summers. Actually, I wrote about it for Wisden Cricket Monthly, driving around the county, going to beautiful grounds with just a handful of fans on deck chairs and reporting back from the radio car, and occasionally getting to drive to places like Colwyn Bay. I think you said, Adam, recently that you wanted to go to Colwyn Bay for a game.
Can't wait.
This summer.
It's not happening this summer,
beautiful.
Unfortunately. They're playing that fixture in Cardiff, but soon enough.
He talks about Colwyn Bay on every episode. Literally every episode of The Final Word has Colwyn Bay.
It's nearly happened. Only because we identified it a couple of years ago as one we go to with Rach and bring Winnie with us.
It's a special place. The light there is. I just remember the light is so beautiful. So blue skies and seaside and the houses just beyond the boundary. It's just fantastic. And Weymouth as well, which is another seaside cricket ground in Dorset. But then I got a job working for Newsbeat on Radio 1. Which is the news programme for the younger listeners, but that was an extraordinary time to work in news, actually, because end of the 80s, so we had things like the collapse of communism, the Berlin Wall coming down, the collapse of Romania, Ceausescu being executed on Christmas Day, then terrible disasters, so Lockerbie disaster, the plane crash in Scotland, the Hillsborough disaster as well happened on a day that I was working. So that was again a Saturday afternoon when I was supposed to be doing reporting on sport, but ended up reporting on this horrendous tragedy, and something which really hit home for me as well, because I watched a lot of football in those days. I used to go to watch Arsenal every Saturday afternoon with my then boyfriend, and just that feeling of horror that something like this could happen at a sports ground, and then it was a really interesting time to do news. But we also rather incongruously did pop interviews as well. So the bands who were in the charts at the time used to come in to be interviewed by us. So I don't think I interviewed Bros, but I certainly interviewed Salt and Pepper.
Oh, you what? I never knew this. But this is tremendous news. I mean, I trust you've seen my jacket.
I have seen the jacket. So I kind of dropped that in there in the expectation that you'd be deeply impressed, and I'm pleased with that reaction.
My respect has, by a factor of 7, it's just increased.
That's very precise, and also one of my other memorable pop interviews at the time was Chesney Hawkes.
Oh, how about that? The different ways your life's intersected with our life.
I know. It's so perfect, isn't it?
It came on the radio the other day, Geoff. It came on Radio 2, which Rach was listening to at the time.
Yep.
I tried to explain to our friends why it was relevant, and I pulled out of the story. I'm like, how am I going to explain to non-cricket friends why Chesney Hawkes the one and only? I'm like, you know what? It doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter that we now know the son of the midwife who delivered Chesney Hawkes. That doesn't matter either.
But if we could put together the Chesney Hawkes adjacent dinner party where we have the midwife who delivered him, Elly who did the interview, Rachel who used to see him going into the milk bar and buying whatever it was that you'd buy. And just the more people who have, the more tangential the link, the better. If you were on a bus that Chesney Hawkes was on,
show, I'd imagine.
I was going to say, I bet he's not doing a great deal these days. I'm sure you could probably get him on if you asked him. No. I mean, maybe a few kind of late 80s revival tours. I remember he was very, very nice. Not all the pop stars in those days were nice. Some of them were complete twats, to be absolutely fair.
I was wondering what adjectives you were going
to use. I know, I was trying to...
You're quite polite usually. Although I have heard you say some pretty serious swear words too. After a glass or two, but I like that you went with twats there.
Yes, I think that's kind of mild enough for a vicar's daughter and a national icon of broadcasting or whatever. Anyway,
national treasure's the word, isn't it?
National treasure, yeah. But he was great. He was great. He was very nice, Chesney. I've always remembered that, and there is something. Very touching about every time I hear him in the context of being a dusty old bastard.
Who played at the Berlin Wall? Somebody.
David Hasselhoff.
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you could have
Freedom.
combined the two, covered the fall of the Berlin Wall and an interview with the Hoff at the same time, that would have been good broadcasting.
It would. Actually, my co-presenter on Weekend Breakfast, Chris Warburton, has done a programme with David Hasselhoff. And occasionally he'll say to me, have I told you about that programme I did with the Hoff? I'll say, yes, you have. I know all about you and the Hoff.
It must be how Geoff, our friends, think about us when talking about the people we get on the show. Fair enough too. I just want to press fast forward a little bit to where you return to sport. So there's this cricket thread that goes through your life, but there's also an Olympics thread. 11 Olympic Games you've covered from 92 onwards, both summer and winter, all the way through. Remember you told me a story last year over breakfast about was it the first person to snaffle Linford Christie, or the Linford Christie story when he wins the 100 at Barcelona, which is your first Olympic Games.
That's right, yeah. We should let Geoff know that we're actually drinking out of Olympic mugs at the moment.
We are, yes. What have I got here? I've got Pyeongchang.
You've got Pyeongchang, I've got Sochi, so Winter Olympics. So it's so up to date, it's 7 summer and 4 Winter Olympics. Amazing. That I've done. So 92 was the first one. And the Linford Christie story, so we won the 100 metres final. Was it the dirtiest competition in the history of...
I think the one 4 years earlier.
The 88 one was pretty bad.
On the juice. Everybody's on the juice. The Arthur Conningham 100 metres. a lot of good ideas going around.
But Linford, clean as a whistle, 1992, wins the 100 metres. And it's that sense that it is it's the moment that the whole world is watching one sporting event, that's less than 10 seconds long. And I was in the International Broadcast Centre that evening just doing the bulletin. So in 1992, I didn't cover a particular sport exclusively. I just did updates. I just got sent out to cover random sports that they didn't have a specialist reporter on. But on that particular night, I was doing the evening bulletins. And Linford came in to do the rounds. So the final happens, and I'm sitting there in the studio waiting to do an update. And I can just remember at that point that he crosses the line, leaping out of my chair chair backwards, scripts flying everywhere. But then he comes around. He's brought in to do all the different broadcast, the UK broadcasters, and so he is suddenly sitting opposite me, like you are now, Adam, and I get to interview the most famous man on the planet at that moment, and it was just amazing. You just think, wow, how lucky am I to be part of this sporting history.
And it's amazing 8 years later as well in Sydney when Erin's 5 months old, and you go straight out to cover the 2000 Olympics with baby in tow, and you somehow find a way to make it work, and it's left an indelible mark on you as a person, that trip to Australia.
It has, yeah. My eldest was born at the beginning of 2000, Erin, and actually I then spent the following summer covering cricket, and we'll talk about that in a second. That was just bonkers. Travelling the country doing a full summer of cricket when you've got a baby under a year old was a bit mad. Wow. But we took, so I really felt when you were taking Winnie out to Australia, Adam, I just really felt for you, because we took Erin out to Sydney for the Olympics. And actually the BBC were amazing. They said, we really want you to work on the Olympics. And Nick, my then husband, was also working on the Olympics because he's a broadcaster too. And so they said, look, there's room for you. We'll make sure that we can make it work domestically, and maybe you get a nanny out there or something like that. And in the end, Nick's mum came with us and stayed in the apartment that we were in, because we had a 2-bedroom apartment. We were only using 1 bedroom, and we paid for her flights. And it was just the most magical experience, because I love the Olympics. I mean, apart from cricket, the Olympics is the thing which has defined my career, I think. And being able to have her there, and then she went on little outings with her grandma and went to Taronga Zoo and went to the Manly Aquarium and went on boat trips across the harbour, and while I was doing programmes and covering judo and whatever else I was doing, and Nick was commentating on hockey, I think. So right. So and we'd then kind of come together in the evening, and I remember one day, because the Olympics is brilliant but utterly knackering, so the days are ridiculously long, and coming back in the evening to our little apartment, I can't remember where it was, somewhere near Parramatta. But anyway, coming back to the apartment in the evening, having not eaten, and my mother-in-law saying, "You look really tired, and have you had any food?" And he's saying, "No." And she said, "I'll make you an omelette." And I said, "Oh, that sounds like the best thing that anybody has said all day." And she's looked after the baby all day, and I've managed to work, and Nick's managed to work, and it was the most. I've got such fond memories, and of course Sydney was epic because the Australians love sport like no one else in the world apart from the Brits.
Greatest games ever, obviously, Sydney. Yep.
Until 12 years later, but yeah. No, I would say it was one of my most enjoyable games by a long way. And I did programs sitting on the steps of the Opera House. And I'd never been to Australia before, and I'd always wanted to go to Australia. I've always had this kind of romantic thing about going to Australia, and maybe it was to do with the cricket and my love of cricket and the history of it, but also that feeling of, you know, actually being very similar in lots of ways. You know, the Brits and the Australians are quite similar in ways and massively different in other ways. But I was so happy to be in Australia and to be in Sydney as well, and that was the first time I'd ever been.
This is where your timeline gets quite interesting. So 2000 is the first year you work on Test Match Special. It's also the year that Donna Simmons commentates on TMS, which means that two women were on the program.
Two women on Test Match Special.
If they get too close to one another, they'll definitely explode. That's how it happens.
For the first time. I mean, the idea that you're juggling a newborn, straight back to work.
While doing interviews on the boundary. Oh my Lord, she's going to start breastfeeding in a moment.
That's what happens. You let one in and then there's another one.
And within a year, I mean, you're then juggling two kids under two. I mean, it's quite a crazy little period of your life where you are. I mean, we talk about blazing a trail. I mean, you blaze that trail on TMS first, along with Donna, to be part of the cast for the first time. Their boundary side day in, day out, with two young babies. That must have been just a hair-raising part of your life. This amazing professional opportunity to do the sport you loved most, alongside this period of life where you had to invest so much in family.
Yeah, and I think this is, I mean, it's a challenge for women in every profession really, is that actually at the point where you reach your professional peak in lots of ways can often be the point where you're having babies, if you're going to have babies. That's the time when you do it. So to get to juggle the two was a real challenge. And you know, as I said, Erin was born in January 2000, and TMS decided that year, or Peter Baxter made the decision that they wanted to make the team a bit more diverse, bring more women on board. So I was given the job of being the roving reporter. So, you know, doing interviews at the start of the day or in the intervals, coming up with ideas for, you know, rain delays and so on. And Donna came over from the Caribbean to commentate alongside Tony Cozier. And it was, and Viv was working on that series as well. I mean, oh God, I was in heaven that summer. But it was amazing, and it did feel like an ambition absolutely fulfilled. But it was a challenge because I didn't want to miss a single thing. I didn't want to miss a game. So it meant that I missed out on quite a lot of Erin's first summer, actually. So she was left at home with Nick or with grandparents who came and stayed and looked after her. It was hard work. It was really hard work, and you know, and there were things that I kind of felt like I did miss out on that. And then, you know, bang, go to Sydney. So happy in Sydney that I go and get pregnant again.
The Olympic spirit came over you.
I'd like to make the point again that my husband at the time was also on the trip. So there isn't there isn't some kind of random meeting in a bar in Sydney, which
no, it wasn't some Cuban long jumper or something like that.
G'day, Sheila.
So within 17 months, I've got two kids.
Yeah. And
then, you know, so that was hard. But so 2001, I missed that whole summer. So Ash's summer, I missed that completely, because it would have been ridiculous to try and do, you know, two children under 17 months old to try and do that whole summer. And then, you know, a few years after that, it was hard work, but it was great. I mean, honestly, because, you know, I just wanted to carry on working as much as possible, and I also wanted to keep my own professional life as well, because even though when you become a mum, or a parent, it's a massively special thing, and it changes you in ways that you can't even begin to imagine. But at the same time, I didn't want to forget that actually I had put in a lot of hard yards becoming a broadcaster and establishing my career by that stage. So it was, I made it work. I made it work with a lot of help from parents, grandparents, childminders, and the BBC being actually pretty good about helping me do that.
The position that a lot of mothers find themselves in and talk about is being sort of having their identity washed away. You know, you become a mother and that's it. You're now that's your entire function, and who you were professionally or otherwise before that ceases to matter to people on the outside of that. Were you conscious of avoiding that before having the kids, or was it something that you had to kind of adjust to on the fly?
I think it's a good question. I mean, I think I always the difference is that my professional name, I mean, Eleanor Oldroyd is my name. You know, it's the name I was born with. It's my father's name, my mother's name. But my married name, even though I never used my married name, was Mullins. So the girls have that surname. So actually, when they were at school, so I led a double life in a way. Actually, when they were little, so I would take them to school, and I would be, you know, the Mullins girls' mother, even though and at work I was still Eleanor Oldroyd. And some people knew people knew I had kids. Obviously, I was very, very careful not to make motherhood a problem for anybody. So I was determined not to ever take a day off and cite the kids as the reason why, or not to take an unscheduled day off. So I can remember in all of the years, because at the time when the girls were small, I was doing a lot of football on a Saturday afternoon. So, and I think there was only one Saturday afternoon where I had to phone up and say, look, I'm really sorry, the childminder's let me down. I can't go to Millwall this afternoon. And that, I think, is the only time I did it. The thing about sport actually is that it does make it easier to be able to organise your life so that you more or less know, I mean, until the last 12 months, you more or less know exactly when sporting events are going to be. So you can say the Olympics is going to be between, you know, the 8th of August 2008 to whatever it is 2 weeks later. And the reason I remember that 8808 was because 8 is the lucky number in Chinese
that's right.
numerology.
Yeah.
So they wanted the opening ceremony to be on the 8th of August. Anyway, so a little kind of nerd pledgy style factoid for you. So I could organise I became quite good at organising my family life and my and my professional life. But I think I was almost I overcompensated in some ways, I think, for being a mum by trying hardly ever to mention it and to press on with it as much as I possibly could.
Yeah, and I suppose tangentially to that, it's that we hear stories about that era, and you've spoken freely about that era being just laden with sexuality, but also sort of the we've already touched on the idea that women were not seen as appropriate people to convey sport, but then there's that extra layer in the workplace as well, which you've talked about historically, that it, you know, with you presenting such high profile events, whether it's Formula One Grand Prix or tennis majors, Olympic Games, cricket, TMS, all the rest of it, that you've said before that you needed to be 2.5 times as good just to get to that benchmark in order to not cop highly sexualised criticism and abuse as before the social media age, I suppose, but it didn't make it any less venomous. Yeah, so it's interesting. 2.5. I mean, I kind of pick a random number from the air when I say that. I think again this goes back to women in all professions having to try quite a lot harder to be accepted. And I think the question of my employers, they've always been great. You know, I've been given opportunities when you might think that they wouldn't have done. So 1992 being the first woman to present major sports programmes on national radio, and then being the first woman to present Sports Report, which is people who don't know it, is the big programme, the kind of historic 5 till 6 hour on a Saturday afternoon where it starts the classified football results, and it was the sort of the record of the day on a Saturday afternoon. So I was the first woman to do that. So I had all of those opportunities, and I think what you say about there being no social media in those days is absolutely crucial, because I think if there had been, I would have been destroyed.
because, you know, you look at the tone of comments to women on social media now who dare to express an opinion about sport or even work in sport, and it's still horrendously toxic. And you just imagine how much worse that would have been 25 years ago, actually, in terms of the number of people who actually really did believe that women, I mean, however much we joke about it, who did believe that women were physiologically or psychologically or knowledge-wise incapable, or just didn't want women in an area that they felt was theirs. But in those days, you know, if you wanted to tell me that I should get back in the kitchen and stop talking about football, you had to go and get a piece of paper and a pen and write a letter and find an envelope and a stamp and work out what the address is and go to the post box.
A higher barrier to abuse.
It was a high. Yes, the abuse barrier was an awful lot higher.
Many people still cleared. You know, many Telegraph reading blokes still found the time and found the energy. I remember one of those comments coming up in a piece a few years ago from a letter, and I think it said, "Oh, well, when there's a man presenting the woman's hour, then you can have women doing the sport." You know, as though every other fucking hour on the radio isn't for men. You know, they're like, no, we need that one. Yes. The one for give us that hour, and then you can come in. You know.
Yeah. Well, I think the one thing, and the thing that I've loved about radio is that, which has given me so many opportunities, is that there seemed to be this positive thing that, you know, the more women, the better. You know, the more the merrier. Whereas in TV in those days, sort of certainly in the kind of mid to late 90s and the early 2000s, if you had a woman presenting, you only needed one woman. You didn't need another woman. No, we've got one of those already. We don't need another one. What will happen to all the men who need opportunities to be able to do this?
And I suppose the right kind of woman too, right? So it was like, well, it needs to be a woman that sounds a certain way. I mean, Ali Mitch, when she spoke to us last year, talked about the way that your voices are critiqued. Even now, the nonsense on, you know, whenever you're hearing a woman commentating cricket, it wouldn't be the first thing you would see in the replies on Twitter, but it might be the third most prevalent thing is the tone of a woman's voice. I mean, you had to make those, had to reconcile that in addition to your day job. Yeah, well,
it's one of the reasons why I've never done much commentary really in my radio career. You know, I mean, apart from royal funerals, and bits actually on TV. So I've done synchronised swimming commentary and judo commentary. I've done very little cricket commentary, which, bearing in mind the hours I've spent watching cricket, and I think it's because in those days, so say mid-90s, and the point, well, until Ali became established, really, and it's one of the reasons that I have such admiration for her and think she's such an awesome person, is that at that time, people really thought women were incapable of commentating without becoming massively overexcited and suddenly becoming all squeaky and probably talking about tampons, you know, and so therefore they should not be allowed to commentate. And so I thought, actually, that's a risk too far. You know, they'll accept me doing match reports, they'll accept me presenting programmes, but I'm not going to push it any further. You know, stay in your lane, love. Don't attempt commentary.
That's really interesting. I mean, if you had been coming through with Ali's generation of broadcaster, you almost certainly would have been a ball-by-ball commentator or other sports that you were turning your hand to, but you still feel as though that was one thing you couldn't do at that particular time when you were forging your way through.
Yeah, I think this goes back to the you know, having to be 2.5 times better that Geoff mentioned. It's that feeling that if you make a mistake, if either of you guys makes a mistake on commentary, then people will say, you got that wrong. You know, that wasn't his slider, that was his, you know, whatever else. But if a woman makes that kind of mistake, I think then, and probably even now, they'll say, well, that's what happens when you get women to commentate on cricket. Clearly women can't possibly, you know, so if you make one mistake as a woman, then your whole sex is ruled out as you know, having any right or ability to commentate on cricket or anything like that. So it was, I think, and by the time I might have, you know, when Ali became established and women started doing it more often, I thought, right, well, why would I take the risk? You know, why would I damage where I am, which is actually quite nice. I quite like my career as it is by trying to do that. And so, you know, I have become more risk averse. But actually now I feel more confident to do it. You know, and I think my knowledge of the game is better. But I think you do have to have an exceptional knowledge of the game to be a cricket commentator, whether it's as an ex-professional or as a journalist, you know, and I don't hold with you have to have played the game to be able to be a cricket commentator, because clearly, you know, that would have ruled me out decades ago. But I do think you have to be pretty much beyond reproach when it comes to getting things technically right and describing what you're seeing. But then I never gave myself the chance to do that, so it's probably too late to go back.
Is that a regret that you didn't get the chance to do that?
Well, a little bit. But then I just think of the things that I have had the chance to do in the years since, and actually I'm not quite sure how I would have fitted it in really. So no, it's. I mean, I sometimes wish I could have done. But actually, we had a moment, didn't we, Adam, last summer when we were together at Old Trafford.
Oh,
do you remember
yeah,
that
we
fantastic
called
ODI where Maxie went mad and Australia got home, and I just remember at the end thinking, oh, I'm going to leave it to the professional to do this last bit. You know, so we were kind of commentating a bit.
Yeah, the last over, wasn't it?
That's
Mitchell
right.
Stark came in at the end with around 10 to get after Maxwell got out. And
that's right.
That was a nice. It was
It was nice. I really like being on the radio with you, but actually I thought I'm not even going to attempt this because I'm going to make myself look like a bit of a tit. So okay. Adam, over to you.
Well, you obviously had plenty going on, as you say, enough time to win the major broadcasting gong with the SJA a couple of times through that 2000s period where you were dipping in and out of cricket but doing so many other things. And then we reached 2017 when you joined the road with us on that Ashes series in 17-18. And what a delightful few weeks it was when we had you in Australia. But I love the idea, and you've mentioned this before, of coming full circle, the cathedral at New Road there, which you started your career in the mid-80s, and then the cathedral Adelaide Oval, where we had that fantastic week, really good test match until the final afternoon when Australia blew it out of the water. But until then, a nice push and pull, and you were finally able to make it to Australia for an Ashes series.
Absolutely, I think it's all about cathedrals. It's all about Gothic architecture and and choirs and stuff. I actually managed to get away with writing a piece for the Night Watchman this year about my theories about choirs and cricket and how they're basically the same thing. But anyway, won't go down that route. But no, it was. I just remember you know when somebody tells you something amazing and you can't. You think, I will always remember where I am at this moment, and I was going through the revolving doors at Media City in Salford, leaving where Five Live Sport are based, and our editor was coming the other way, and he said, "Oh, Elly, hang on, I just want to have a word with you." And so I stopped, and he said, "How do you feel about going to the Ashes?" And so this was September 2017, and I just thought, oh my God, you just asked me the question I have waited my whole life to be asked. And he said we'd really like you to do Melbourne and Sydney. And I thought, oh shit, because it would have meant, missing Christmas, going out for Christmas. Erin's 18th birthday was January 2018. I was due to do the Commonwealth Games. I thought, I can't be away for all of that stuff, because actually in the end, they still need me. I mean, they're 18 and 16, but they still need me. And then I said, I don't know whether I can. He said, well, how about if we said Brisbane and Adelaide instead? And I just thought, yes. So I flew out to Australia. I've never been so happy in my life, I don't think, as shopping and preparing for that trip. And then being there, I got the worst cold in the world those first few days at the Gabba. So to the point where I couldn't actually speak for several hours on day 2. and Henry Moran, our lovely friend Henry, took over from me and did all the Five Live updates overnight. But one of my best memories actually of that trip was on the just before the first day at the Gabba, and doing a kind of half-hour programme, sort of building up to the first ball being bowled, with Mel Farrell, and the two of us sitting there in the box at the Gabba, just chatting cricket between the two of us for a half hour. And I thought, shit, they've got two blonde women talking about cricket for half an hour ahead of the Ashes. We've come quite a long way, haven't we? And so that was an amazing trip. And yeah, as you say, it was, it was kind of up for grabs for a very, very brief moment going into the final day at Adelaide. And I remember sitting having breakfast. We did a programme over breakfast, which you came on, didn't you? You were there. Yeah, I've got a picture of you and Mel and Henry with the worst hangover in the world, I think, he was sober. He was fine that time. But doing the programme and then Paul Farbrace coming and wandering over. Do you remember?
Yeah, I think we had. I want to say, did Joe Root swing by at one point? We tried to collar him on the way through.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
It was one of those days when anything was possible.
Absolutely.
And in the end, they were blown out of the water. But
yeah.
Just that
brief
for
moment.
English listeners who were tuning in, thinking they could pull even in the Ashes.
I know, and it was brilliant. And then I flew back after Adelaide, so they split it. They split the 5 Live reporting role, and Jonathan Overend came in for Melbourne and Sydney. But I remember packing my case in tears, because I just so didn't want to go home at that point, and thinking, sod the kids, what am I doing going home? Forget Christmas. Erin, you're just going to have to celebrate your 18th birthday on your own. I'm going to stay here. Do not send me home.
You have Christmas every year.
Oh, sorry, you go.
Whatever.
You go, Geoff. It's funny thinking about the various women broadcasters that we've had on this program over the last 3 or 4 years or whatever it's been, and the extent to which they review you. So whether it's Elly, Isha, Ebony, Izzy, Mel, I mean, you're seen as such an important figure in all of their careers as well. Do you sense that now that you remain such a source of inspiration to a whole generation of women who probably wouldn't have received the opportunities they had in quite the same way, if not for what you were doing 20 or so years ago?
I mean, it's really lovely to hear, and it feels sort of slightly surreal you saying that, because it's not, it's not what I've aimed to do particularly, because I've done it for my own selfish reasons, because I wanted to create my own career and love what I do. But you do remember the people who help you at the start of your career, I think. And I always remember one of the great moments for me was when I was at university and writing to Christopher Martin Jenkins, who was the editor of The Cricketer at the time, and saying that, what I wanted to do. And he said, well, why don't you come down and visit me at The Cricketer, and I'll show you around, and maybe we can have a chat about some features that you might be able to write for me. And me thinking, oh my God, this most important man. I mean, he was at the peak of his career at The Cricketer and Test Match Special, and just before he became Telegraph cricket correspondent as well, and then BBC cricket correspondent. But the fact that he paid me attention and was as nice as you could ever imagine, because he was the nicest man, the most disorganised man, but the nicest man in cricket. It's always made me think, actually, it's a very powerful thing to help people and to be there for them, and just to spend a little bit of time saying a few encouraging things, but also to be able to see what people have done before you. And for me, so in those days in the mid 80s, there was no role models really, and certainly in broadcasting, from a female point of view. There was a writer called Julie Welsh who wrote for The Observer on football, but she was the only female byline that you ever really saw writing about sport in those days. So I'm thrilled. I mean, I'm really thrilled, and I think it might be accidental as much as anything that I've kind of gone out of my way to do. But I love the idea that these awesome, I mean, Isha and Ebbs and Ali and Izzy and Mel, are my. I love my girls.
Mm.
I love my boys as well. But it just feels a wonderful thing to be able to have done and to help. Helped, even if it's been inadvertent.
Well, we talk about trailblazers a lot in sport, and I often find that people don't understand the metaphors and aphorisms that they use in sports writing and sports coverage. They just use them automatically. But so to explain it, if people don't actually know, the blaze is the bit that you chop out of a tree in order to leave a mark. And so the trailblazer is the person who goes first and cuts marks in the trees so that those who come after them can see where they're supposed to go. And in this context, that's you. That's what you've done. You're actually the trailblazer for everybody else.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's very, very nice to hear. But yeah, there has to be somebody, as you say, who makes the first cut, and I suppose it was me in lots of ways.
Interesting as well that you've tapped into a part of the cricket. I was going to say counterculture. It might not be the right term exactly, but like you're the queen of Tailenders. I mean, I've been to those live shows when you're sitting in the balcony in the Royal Box, isn't it? There. And again, the audience, who some of whom are cricket people, but a lot of people have found cricket by Tailenders and thus have grown warm to the game in the last few years. But your importance in their world. I mean, that's kind of fascinating as well, that whilst you are a conventional broadcaster, come through the conventional way and work on radio, that there's this online community who love you as well and see you as their queen. It's kind of cool.
I mean, that equally feels massively surreal. And we went to the live show, didn't we, at Hackney Empire, which was the first one, so end of 2019. And actually, I took Erin along. So you know, I mean, my other daughter Rosie, who is, you know, my little ray of Australian sunshine, I always think is where she was made. But Erin is actually really quite into her cricket, but that's partly through Tailenders. And because of Greg James, you know, so it's Greg James who presents the Radio 1 Breakfast programme, and she loves Greg. So she started listening to Tailenders and has actually developed quite an interest in cricket as a result of that. So I took her along to the Hackney Empire, and at the start, you know, they did a kind of intro, and I'd recorded an intro for them, and then Greg said, you know, Queen of Tailenders, Elly Oldroyd, and pointed to the balcony, and the whole bloody Hackney Empire stood up and applauded. And I was thinking, I'm sorry, no, this is just stupid now. Come on, this is ridiculous. And Erin was looking at me and going, what? You know, this is my mum. So I'm not quite sure whether she was embarrassed or proud or a mixture of both. But it's and I suppose, and again, part of that is the accident and the fact that I've been doing radio for quite a long time, and people who will have listened to me on Radio 1 are probably now in their kind of 30s and 40s, and yeah, so I've been around in people's lives for a long time, so there's an accident of ubiquity probably in all of that, as well as anything else. But it's very, very nice, and I love Tailenders boys as well as you.
I have a final question, Elly. If you are the Queen of Tailenders, then who is going to do the live reports from your funeral?
Well, I'm demanding you, Geoff, of course. If you want to make a pitch now for it, then of course I will put in a good word for you.
The procession through the streets of London will narrate it from start to end.
I think you'd strike the tone perfectly.
Elly, you've been such a supportive friend and colleague to Geoff and I, and to so many people in the industry. And beyond that as well, it feels like, I mean, you do so much around my life personally. I mean, I love the fact that when Winnie's old enough, she'll go to Lords with you. I think that's just an amazing thing. Thank you for taking the time to spend so long with us today. I can't wait to go to lunch with you now and have another long conversation and keep doing what we're doing. It's been great to have you on The Final Word.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. As I said, I love the podcast, and thank you both. And Geoff, will raise a glass for you in your absence, and hopefully we'll manage to do it in person at some point.
Hope so.
It's The Final Word. Adam Collins and Geoff Lemon, as we prepare to say goodbye for another week. Well, not a full week, really. We'll have the Storytime edition coming out on Saturday, as is the custom with a weekend show. And we're ever so grateful for Elly making it possible to talk to her today. She's a very busy woman, but as you would have gleaned from that interview, someone we're very fond of, and it's, to spend as long as we did talking through her amazing story is something that I think we're both grateful for, and I reckon will go down as one of our most enjoyable interviews.
I think I'm trying to remember a comment. It may have been Graham Swan, who's not always everybody's cup of tea broadcasting, but off air at one point in 2019, he said something along the lines of, there's something about hearing Elly Oldroyd. When you hear her voice, you just feel like everything's going to be all right. And that's kind of how it feels. That's how it felt for that last hour or so, just listening to that conversation. Just felt like maybe things, I mean, I know things are bad, and I know they're always bad in a lot of places, a lot of the time, but they're also okay in some other places some of the time, and maybe there's just that feeling that in some way, to some extent, at some point, things are going to be okay.
Nice positive note to leave it on, Geoff. Thank you to everybody who's contributed to the Patreon page at different points. We tend to have a bit of volatility around the Patreon page at the start of a month, but it also is the catalyst for new people signing that dotted line and hitting that button at the bottom of the screen. Thank you to everybody who's done that. Thank you to Zolio, and thank you to Cbus Super, who've been extraordinary supporters of The Final Word over such a long period of time. To everybody who reviews and rates us too, it goes without saying that makes a difference. So if you've never jumped on that iTunes page, if you've listened to the Elly interview and thought that was worthwhile, I liked what they did there, more people should listen to these two youngsters We can't really call ourselves youngsters anymore, it must be said.
It's only that just in the specific industry that we work in, we still happen to be like generally probably the youngest two in the room. But in any other, if we were athletes, we'd be veterans or stalwarts. Or,
yes, we're older than almost every single player that we talk about or write about. But yes,
that's why we like Darren Stevens so much.
Yes, he'll keep us young. But by clicking that review button, you can help more people listen to the show, and it helps make the world go round, as does the Patreon page. Thank you again to Elly. Thanks for listening, everybody. And yes, again, we said this last week, but to our friends in India who are watching on YouTube especially, let's hope that the next week's better than the one that's gone before it, and the one that went before that. Our thoughts are with you. This has been The Final Word. Adam Collins and Geoff Lemon, and we will talk again through the course of the week. Bye.
See ya.